The Thursday, April 5th meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee will come to order. We are joined today by Selectman Doug Brown, who apparently does not have a day job. and by Erica Woods and George Heufelder, who have produced the long-awaited final report to the town of Falmouth on performance of Echo toilets. This has been a matter that's been on our menu for many years. We've probably devoted more time and energy to the details of ascertaining the value of Echo toilets than almost anything else we've done in conjunction with George and the test center and the county. And they had a contract to analyze the work that was done in conjunction with us, and they have come here today to present the results of their work.
Well,
Wow.
where would you like us to?
If you would go up to the microphone, our nationwide TV audience will be able to hear you and see you.
All right. Well, we came mainly to answer questions on the report. We did get some comments from Hildy and Maine Gay, and those will be incorporated in the final report. Particularly the diagram, which was off, and looking at some of the pictures that she submitted, we'll probably include those in the final report also, because of all the ones that were successful, a lot had a pretty high percentage of removal. So we're really open to questions. Erica Woods, who is the person who did most of the dirty work, and I do mean dirty work because she did a lot of the collection of the samples and working with some of the homeowners to get some of the details. And even in the main gaze system, you'll see some pretty high counts beforehand and even at the beginning part of the study. And that sort of encouraged Erica to work with the main gauge to find out exactly their discharge point for their gray water, which we finally worked out to see the values that are there. There's no doubt in my mind, I don't know, Erica, if you had anything to say about it, that this is an excellent way to reduce nutrients and to reduce water use should the public ever come around and engage in saying, yes, we want to do it. For those who do it, it's pretty obvious. It's a reduction in water use, it's a reduction in nutrients, and offers some opportunities, though I can't be in full agreement with the addenda we got in the email as far as the innocuous nature of it afterwards or the ability to immediately recover nutrients, since that would bear a little bit further investigation. Did you have anything, Erica?
I don't think so. Just again, here to answer questions if you have any.
Comments or questions from members of the committee? Ron.
Hi, great. This is great to see. Thanks so much. It's a very comprehensive and has a lot of detail. And I think just one suggestion is that perhaps that because that diagram was off slightly for Hilda and Earl's system, that you might want to have each, I don't know who the case studies are, but maybe each of them could just look at it to be sure that just to confirm the configurations are correct. That's part of it because they looked at it and said, oh, well, this is close, but not quite right. So, so I would suggest that be done just so that it'd be good for them to see the feedback anyway, I think, directly. And on your discussion and conclusions, I thought they were very well thought out, of course. There's nothing there, but I'm just trying to think of, I think even your suggestion for, the concern was, of course, the disposition, basically, or what happens with the materials that are left over, and how they might be used, or issues over moving them out of the watershed, basically, to be sure that we're not reincorporating things into the watershed that we're trying to control. the phosphorus, nitrogen, et cetera. And I think that was good. I think also that as you mentioned, should this take off as or maybe even be mandated in some cases because of its ability to control, very strongly control outflow, and maybe more cost effective than some other options, that what to do with the products at the end, the compost and the urine, in that case of the urine diverting systems. And there had been some discussion about centralizing some kind of, but this is down the road, of course, but considerations of like an eco-drum type of thing where you've got a central area where more things could be run through it. Restaurant waste, compost waste, toilet waste, uncomposted toilet waste, leaves, whatever could be done. And that's another business kind of option that may be derived from this. So I think that those aspects of that, once you get it in the box, then what do you do with it from there? And that there could be issues of that. And at the same time, though, there could be even on-site incorporation in the biota that would reduce the loss. The one question I have that wasn't addressed in the report is that if you have a compost, maybe the compost literature has this, and I'm just not aware of it, but if you have a solid waste compost that's there, actually how much nitrogen that goes in is volatilized. In other words, assuming it captures all of that as indicated, okay, that's coming in, like whatever it is, percentage compared to Title V system, in the composting process, is there much nitrogen gas released? How does the balance work out in the end? Is it, that element? I don't recall reading that in the report, but that's always been a question in my mind, that the recovery, even though you capture so much, it doesn't mean you recover so much, because some of it may be over the year volatilized or by going to gaseous nitrogen, or, well, phosphorus will be there, probably, but the nitrogen side may be less, and the carbon to nitrogen ratio and all this kind of thing that may result. There may be literature on this already, but that was a question I had, is that really how much is captured of the inflow? So
I believe we made some crude calculations, and these were based on, first of all, what we believed went into it, what we knew we retrieved from tea, or the compost tea, because
Right.
we had some analysis done by Dr. Hutchinson up at the University of Maine School of Composting, and we did a little bit of work that didn't get in the report exactly on that, where we tried to figure out whether the tea, or in some cases urine that was diverted, could be used as a starter for thermophilic composting, because even though we call these composting toilets, they aren't composting in the true means of, they're not brought up to temperature that would kill pathogens. Mostly you outweight them. They're going to die because they dry out during the composting process, or they die because of nutritional requirements. Some of them is why I didn't quite agree with the email we got about its innocuous nature after 2 years. We know that parasite eggs can last a long time, and Clostridia, some other Clostridia that are pathogenic, have been found in sediments years after they've been deposited in those sediments. In fact, they're used as tracers for old sewage plumes. So we believe that what is volatilized off is fairly minor, but there was one where we did a calculation of it. As far as what's done to the products afterwards, well, what drives that, how you handle that, is driven primarily by the numbers you get to engage in the process. If you have a lot of compost, a lot of people engage in this, and even urine diversion, there'll be a market at some point where that will become a usable thing to co-compost with something, and then be able to use it as a soil amendment afterwards. There would be a process that would have to go through. DEP would have to have something like a use permit. You'd have to determine whether it had any sort of reuse ability due to any metals concentration or anything like that. But I think Falmouth didn't have enough participation that would warrant going forward to the point where you say, okay, let's do the economics on the whole thing. We actually looked at a drum and say, okay, if 1,000 people had it, you'd obviously want a centralized place where people could bring the compost to get it out of their watersheds and to bring the tea. During this study, the test center served as a repository for the tea, simply because we had a place to dispose of it. And we had that work done by Dr. Hutchinson up in Maine. That was in conjunction with another grant we had. He tried to start compost, thermophilic compost, by the way, and he found the stuff had just too much water to it. Didn't have enough, nitrogen really in it. But I think we learned a lot from the study. We sort of went back into the whole issue that this is a great way to do things, people would do it. I mean, if somebody had me distill it into 2 lines, that would be one of those lines. Would say, great way to handle nutrients and save water. Should you find a community that was willing to do it, or I suppose mandated, but I don't think that's going to happen. We have, by the way, had requests from, I was just mentioning, a gentleman in Colorado who is publishing books on this type of thing and trying to find out the experiments around the country with urine diversion and composting toilets, which are, of course, an ultimate urine diversion toilet also. And we sent him a copy of the report, which I don't think we'll be getting residuals real soon from that. I mean, residuals in a good sense. Well, we get plenty of residuals from composting toilets, but I think we learned something. I think you learned about what the community desires, what they would have. Basically, the level of participation indicates there's not a whole lot of appetite. Perhaps that's a bad metaphor. Appetite for this type of thing.
George, going forward, the participants, how are they going to continue to get rid of their teas and compost?
Good question. We have some that are actually diverting their urine, and we're collecting it at the test center for some of the research that's being done up in Vermont by the Rich Earth Institute. So they're continuing to work with the urine. So their compost, as you know, it's allowed under the code to bury it 6 inches down, and we're hoping that they indeed do that. It's only been a couple of years, so I imagine that there's not much compost out there because everybody envisions this being enough compost to keep Aunt Martha's roses alive for years, but it's really not a whole lot of compost. Composting is a very efficient mass reduction. So they can dispose of it on site if they would like, according to the regulations.
Right. And I just say one more comment. In looking at Deer Island in Boston, and that they have their biodigesters and all these stuff there, and the effluent from that system somehow is piped under the harbor to a fertilizer company, okay, where that goes there. So it could be that there are centralized companies like that. Our wastewater treatment facility ships out truckloads of sludge weekly.
In 9,000-gallon tankers.
Yeah. Anyway, they're going somewhere away. Okay?
Right.
So it's something that if it became significant enough, I mean, it could be that would be a way of bringing it for reuse.
Oh, absolutely.
That kind of thing.
And it will all come down to the money.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, there are models out there now that say if people collected their urine, where would the nearest centralized place have to be for anybody to make money on it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once they work out and they're, I don't know, the EPA has given some money to, I think it's Maryland, to try to figure out how to recover strychnite from urine. If you produce a product that has a value down the road, the money will drive where this closest centralized collection will be. I mean, right now, if you said, okay, we have to get rid of everybody in Falmouth who has had one of these things, they would do just as you said. They would call Clivis Multrum, who would say, yes, we will come and pick up that stuff for a fee, and they will go and bury it 6 inches somewhere outside the watershed, where they will till it in someday and start growing hay on it, and not worry about it. But if you had 1,000 of those in Falmouth, you better believe somebody like a Ron Zweig might say, there's a I'm sorry, might figure that there's a fertilizer opportunity here, and you know, there is a market for it at some level. Will we ever reach that level? I'm going to kind of doubt it on Cape Cod, but you better believe in areas where, you know, water's a premium and nutrients are a premium, it will develop. I've already had calls I had a call from India where the guy said, hey, how does this stuff recover? How can you do this? You know, I mean, the technologies and the people doing the research are out there. But let's face it, why we don't have it in the Northeast? You have too much water. And whether that's a true statement I just said or whether it's a perceived statement, it doesn't matter. That's how people act. We have more water than we can throw poop into, so we're just going to keep doing that. And, you know, I really admire folks like Hildy and others who say, you know, we got to stop this train. But they've given the right analogy. That's a 200-ton train, and there's a few things trying to hold that back, and it's just not stopping real soon.
Would you mind just saying how many total toilets there were?
I think we had 11 cases that we dealt with, but there are more people around the Cape who we have come into contact with that we absolutely know have used them and love them. But in Barnstable, I can think of a handful. In Wellfleet, I can think of 2 or 3. But, you know, how many people in Barnstable? So we're going at a pretty low percentage here. And these people are advocates, just like Hildy. They'll allow people to come in the house and look at them. And some of these houses are not, these are high-end houses. And these aren't people who still subscribe to Mother Earth News. These are people who, you know, they're right up there. They don't have anything to do with, you know, anything in nature except that toilet in their yard and in their house, and they're very happy about it. But there's just not enough of it. I don't think we've seen it yet. It's too bad, really. Every talk I give on alternative septic systems, when somebody asks at the end what the best thing is, I say, why do we create so much water to put our waste into it and then take all the money and take it out? I said, don't create the wastewater. Best thing you can do is, we could never do that. Well, as long as somebody keeps the attitude that we can never do that, we will never do that. But, hey, you know, I don't do anything with the sort of the social aspect of it, and I'm not a philosopher, but if somebody asks, I'd say, sure, why the heck are we doing it? I'm sorry.
For those who don't remember, 7 years ago when this project began, the town did pursue several initiatives. One was a $5,000 sort of signing bonus for anybody who wanted to participate in the program and install an eco toilet. The other was in the sewer service area, the 1,600 plus 1,600 plus participants who were in the sewer service area were all asked, would you like to install an eco toilet? And if you do, we will waive what we thought was $16,000, and then it turned out to be $13,000 betterment. So a $13,000 signing bonus was essentially offered to them, and none of them took it. So we learned something.
The county offers 0% loans for everybody, anyone who wanted to repair the septic system and would put one in their house. 0% loan.
Steve.
I thought it was a great report, and I
Thank
don't
you.
know if it's too late to add a sentence to it.
No, there's not too late,
Oh.
since we're now going to add a few photographs and some amendments.
In line with what Eric just said, I mean, and you mentioned fairly in the report the degree of, the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of public acceptance. If you wanted to quantify that, you could mention that $5,000 incentive pulled in, I think the numbers were 167 out of 20,000 interested people, and self-selected enthusiastic people. And of those, 11 or 15 went ahead with it after seeing, being briefed on the facts.
And actually, only 2 of them already had
Yes.
been installed already.
Okay.
Is there a separate report on the whole issue of, acceptance? Or, because this is just based on performance, right? And that's one,
Yeah, I believe SIA has produced some documents.
that was before my
They were
time,
not
but-
only cost documents, but they were the whole acceptance.
Yes.
I just meant as a quantitative
Yes.
amplification of the sentence you have in there about.
And
I
as
think
long
you'd
as
like
you're
to put some
doing that,
detail
George, you
on it.
might just say that we offered a substantial incentive in the Little Pond Sewer Service
Right.
Well,
area.
actually, it's in your introduction,
Yes.
on page 1 in italics before you get into the body of it. So you did give some background on that.
But that wasn't your assignment. You
And
did
and
your part.
given such a hurdle to getting these things in place and in use, it might be worth really emphasizing, just in a separate section, spend more time developing this public acceptance story and what a problem it presents, and give people a heads up, because it is a key factor. Like you said, 165 people or something came back to get the details, and then out of that, 8% or something, or whatever it was, finally did it. And 2 of those, as Erica just said, already had systems. Pretty startling.
one of the reasons I asked is because I still have people asking me. I had somebody come from the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition saying, we'd love to look into this, among other technologies, for the 3 Bays watershed.
Yes.
And I said, are you aware of, the work that's gone on in Falmouth? And he was completely unaware. So is there a plan to disseminate
Yes,
this information?
absolutely. Once the final report, and you folks accept the final report, which will include what we talked today about, as well as the things we got from Hildy, revised diagram, then it goes on our website, and then we'll put it out there. We'll send it to the 3 Bays folks. Interesting enough, there's somebody in the 3 Bays area, particularly right on Cotuit Harbor, very high-end house, old captain's house, with 3 of them in the house. 3 composts, not just 3 toilets, 3 separate units. And I was sure that the husband there was going to kill me for even suggesting it. The wife went forward and purchased them and put them in. I got a call 2 years later that he said, haven't had a problem with them. And I asked her, how her husband was with them. He said, well, when he goes down the basement, he's turning that crank, because the one particular unit has, the guy did a very good thing, and I think this should be written down somewhere, but in the composting toilet, you have to turn it.
Yep.
And there's some that you have to get in there and rake, and people generally don't like this, but this gentleman has taken a stainless steel ratchet wrench that fits right on there and cranks. Now, what guy in this room doesn't like that huge wrench just to feel that ratchet going? I said, that is a marketing tool right there. Everything's like stainless on it.
Fair enough.
So we're happy to do the report. And Erica, by the way, let her speak for herself, but she's also monitoring our West Falmouth Harbor project. So she's not only getting her hands dirty there, she's also getting them in the wastewater.
I get into all the good stuff.
Erica, do you work for the test center?
I
Works for the county.
Yeah, I work for Barnstable County. I'm an environmental specialist, so I do a lot of things like helping cover health departments as well, too. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, this has been a big issue in the town. I really think that you've pulled all of that information together. It's been very helpful.
Thank you. It's
It
a
has.
great project to work on, actually.
Well, we've been supplying you with great projects, and we may have some more before we're done.
We keep going.
Great. Well, thank you very much, but don't go far, because the next item on the agenda relates to yesterday's workshop and where we are on
Okay,
IAs.
all right.
So, any further discussion or questions or comments on this one?
I just
before we-
wanted to suggest, if you didn't already plan to do this, to make sure it gets posted on the Cape Cod Commission's technologies matrix that they
Sure.
have. Currently, there's no references or other information available for these technologies there, so that would fit nicely on that website.
Right. Well, I think the mini step would be you submit the final report with the various changes and corrections, and then we'll vote to accept it at the next meeting, and then it can
Okay.
be posted anywhere, and that will conclude your contract
Right.
with the Water Quality Committee.
Sure.
Would it make sense to include as an appendix the report that Sia did for us, that we've all been referring to?
Yes.
Sure, if you'd like that as an appendix to this report.
It might make sense for someone in the outside world taking
They
a look
really
at all
should go
this.
together,
They should
because
be definitely together. Yeah.
Okay.
And I just wanted to compliment Erica and George for given a very limited sample base they had to work with. I'm tempted to call the residuals, the results are pretty good. But it's tough with so few samples to work with, although the results are dramatic, which helps,
Yes.
certainly helps.
Great, well, thank you. Next item is comments on the Buzzards Bay Coalition Workshop, which two of us attended, I guess, yesterday, which was pretty much a sort of a broader discussion in the whole Buzzards Bay watershed community about what we've been doing in West Falmouth, where the IAs have been taking us, and where we thought they were going to take us as we keep expanding that experiment. You were the star of that show, and I wonder if you could kind of give folks a little bit of a summary.
Sure. I think what was hoped for yesterday were a couple of things. One is to sort of roll out some results in general, which how the project went, the owners or the public participation and how that went, and what features of West Falmouth, in particular the community out there, lent to making it a success. And I think Falmouth has had some really good success in that area. The one which is those situations where there's seasonal homes, and they're clearly seasonal homes, and they don't generate much black water, but they do generate some. How do you deal with that in light of the technologies that would be available to handle it? And a very simple technology evolved, which it took some to get the state to accept it, and it was a very nice, elegant way to do it. Have two side streams, one for your gray water, one for your black water, and just pump your black water. So a very low flush toilet into a tank, pump it out. For folks who are using their homes less than 6-8 weeks a year, and there's limited occupation in there, that's a very elegant solution. Protects the public health by putting a bypass that could let that tank exit into the distribution box and out to a standard Title V, which hopefully never happens because there's an alarm set at 75% of the volume, so they can call and get it pumped. Erica, again, was instrumental in collecting data on the gray water, which bore out very much like what we find in the literature, about 10 milligrams per liter and below in the gray water, because still there's nitrogen in gray water. There's the food that goes down the sink and pee that goes in the shower, and if you never said you peed in the shower, you lied about other things too. So that was one part of it. The other part I think the Falmouth should be particularly proud of is because around the country there is a search for the alternatives that can help and the management structure to support them that would help. And Falmouth chose 2 or 3 technologies that were right on the edge. You know, they had good theoretical basis to work. We had a review committee to look at the available data. But you know, when you see available data, you don't know how much of that gets cherry-picked and put out in front of you. And I think that the West Falmouth Harbor project is tracking very much like many of the demonstration projects, where 3 of the 4 systems work real well, and one or so are not working well, and you can't quite figure out how it's not working well, but a little forensics and you might be able to figure that out. So the project is going along pretty well. I think the average of all of the systems is like 14 milligrams per liter. The hope was 12. I think there will be improvements that happen as that project goes forward. The biggest challenges, as we know anyhow, are your seasonal homes. And those homes that those technologies don't work real great at, but they get pretty heavy use during the season. And the technologies can't get down to below 12. And as you think about it, and I've always said this, and I'll repeat it again now, is if you have a seasonal home and you're down around 14, 15 milligrams per liter, you have to remember you're not getting flow to that system 75% of the time. So that needs to be factored in there somewhere with, because they're not there 75% of the time. The definition is seasonal. Some of them have shoulder use, shoulder season use. But I think that project was very well on track. I spent most of my time yesterday sort of trying to get engineers to look a little differently at innovative alternative septic systems. An engineer on Cape Cod has, in the past, had it pretty darn easy. Where's the sand? Make it go away. And they have blocks in their CAD drawings, I know because I have the same blocks, which say leach field, boom, here it is, 1,500 gallon septic tank. Oh, go down until you find the soil that goes at less than 2 minutes an inch. Well, I think that what I tried to do yesterday is say, look, these things are not rocket science. They're science, but they're not rocket science. They're not difficult to design, and the biggest issues are working with a homeowner to set the expectation right, to set the expectation not only on treatment. A homeowner, quite frankly, doesn't care a whole lot about treatment. Most of the homeowners care about how much will it cost, how much will it cost to run, what's going to be sticking out of the ground, what's that noise I hear every night, all of those things. So I encouraged engineers, and I went through a sort of a litany for them to say, work with the homeowners, sit down and find out what they like, what they don't like, what they can see in the house, in the backyard, and what they say, I better not see in the backyard. How these things make noise, the alarms, always take with yourself a little alarm and say, here's what it sounds like when that goes off, here's what you will do. Because if we don't start sort of easing people into the idea that this is an appliance in their house, it's not just a hole in the ground that you dump poop into. It's an appliance. And if we can get folks used to that and the engineers familiar with it, bringing that whole education even around to the installer who puts it in, because they're very important too. Some of these things you can't have too much cover over. And I've been to enough final inspections where the homeowner says, gee, I'd really like to blend that hill in there. And next thing you know, the septic system's 5 feet underground where it was accessible to anybody for maintenance. And there's a cover under there with a pump. And someday some jabroni's gonna have to go down there and get it. And it's probably gonna be somebody in the middle of winter when that thing doesn't work. So I talked a lot about just making sure that the planning process for these as they roll out and as we get, I believe they're going to put another 10 in that area. We can work with homeowners because we learned a lot from that project. And sampling locations. Sampling locations are going to be key, and you have to let the homeowner know. You know, once a month somebody's going to roll up here and they're going to be nice and neat and clean, but they're going to have to get into that sampling location. So, setting the expectations, that's what yesterday was about, educating folks into it and hearing some back from them. I had some engineers, a couple of installers from the Cape were there. Some of the board members here were there. Folks from Falmouth, Mike McGrath gave his spiel at the thing, which was expected. So, any questions?
Well, John, you were there.
Yeah, I think George has summarized it very very nicely. I think it went over very, very well and was useful to that group of people to start thinking about. And there were people there from Westport and the towns on the other side of the bay that haven't given this a great deal of thought, and I think they're going to come and pick our brains about what we're learning.
They were quite interested in the Oyster Pond effort to at least tease out from DEP what are the requirements going to be should a town decide to use IA systems for their TMDLs. What's the sampling plan going to look like? What's the operation and maintenance sort of structure going to look like? Something I like to call a responsible management entity. What will that look like? Will it be town-based? Will it be outsourced? Who will pay for it? And there was a big question there. One of the questions, and every town faces it, it's easiest to do in a sewer place, but it's difficult to do it in a watershed with 500 houses. If only 250 have to put it in, what do you do with the other 250? Not so much what do you do with them, how do they contribute to the resource drain that the 250 or 200 are doing to protect that watershed. You can't let them skid. So what's that financial mechanism going to look like? What are those legal instruments going to look like that encourage and/or force folks to say, okay, Harry put in this very expensive system and it's in his backyard and somebody's going to have to see it every day. But I'm like 2 streets away, I don't do anything. That's great. Wow, Harry, nice job. Well, it's got to be, well, Harry, you know, who's gonna sort of extract those resources from the folks who benefit from it?
That was a key
Yeah,
takeaway from this. One of the homeowners was there, and he pointed out the dissonance between the homeowners who put them in and the homeowners who didn't put them in is ongoing.
Right.
Well, I
He
think
didn't say there were riots, but he said there was some angst between those who did and those who didn't.
Well, this was predicted 10 years ago by OPEB.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I'm thinking a watershed-based betterment fee
Yes.
would work. And,
Well-
and if you're in that watershed, here's what we need to do, and you can sign on early and get the benefits of it. In your house, if you don't sign on, then you basically carry a substantially greater load of what the people that have it installed are gonna pay. I could see some sort of sliding scale over time where people would sign up.
The Innovative Alternative Working Group has sort of taken a first and a second cut at this, and we're going to have to ratchet up our game on this, because
Move it downfield toward DEP because it's been
Exactly.
submitted to DEP.
yes,
And as you said, you know, it rolls off very easy. Watershed permit, everybody's in the club, everybody has to pay the dues. However, you know, actually, that first of all has never been done.
right.
So what's never been done always has a little inertia that you have to overcome. And the other one is, you know, those legal instruments that get you there are often mired when people start looking around and saying, wait, you can't legally do that. You can't better me. I'm not connected to anything here. But, you know, I think that with the emergence of what's happened with the 208 plan, what Falmouth has found out, and it has to start a new approach. There has to be a new paradigm out there for contributing to what happens in your watershed. One out in the island I thought was pretty innovative. I'm surprised the gentleman hasn't, he probably has somebody else start his cars now, but he wanted a nitrogen tax. If you're in the watershed and you don't have the thing, you're going to get a nitrogen tax. Go off your water, assume concentration, here's what you got, here's what you paid. Yeah, okay. Let's have a room full of people, somebody stand up and say that, and let's see if that person who stood up and said that gets out of the room.
It's even more complicated than that too, because the properties that you would presumably most like to have the system are the ones closest to the
Yes.
waterfront. And they're also the ones that presumably benefit the
Yes.
most from the clean water. So it's another
Yeah,
issue.
because people way up in the watershed say, hey, I can't even walk that beach anyhow. Or I don't have access there, or why should I? And so, you know, there's a lot that has to be done. The plus here on Cape Cod is there's a lot more education in individuals who, now, I mean, I don't know there's anybody out there who couldn't describe in some sort of detail, even if rudimentary, what a watershed is. Say, yeah, a drop of water hits there, goes there, everything that hits there that goes there is in the watershed.
Yeah, but 40 years ago, we had an analogous situation, simpler in that you could chemically eventually find out exactly what was happening, and that was the idea that a molecule of sulfur thrown in the air in Illinois had an impact in Vermont,
Right.
hundreds of miles away. So I think there's legal standing to pursue this on a smaller scale. The big problem is going to get believable models about exactly what's happening underground vis-a-vis the waterfront house versus one that's 500 feet away versus one that's 2,000 feet away from the body of water we're trying to save.
Right.
Yeah.
That gets you back to Mike McGrath's oft-repeated
Sure.
analysis that attenuation exists, except in Massachusetts. And he's happy to point that out.
Yeah, there is still some controversy. For instance, in the Chesapeake watershed, because I sat on their committee for nitrogen attenuation under septic systems. They believe that they have a tiered approach. Those closest to water, within 0 to 100 feet, they have to remove nitrogen to X standard. The next level to another standard, the next to another standard. And then, of course, they've taken a lot of Ivan's work down there and said, after so much, there is no real problem. So therefore, but they're still working through that whole equity thing of what happens up in the watershed. And, you know, there's not even agreement on the loading itself, the concentrations coming out of septic tanks. So you're right. You have to have a believable model that folks generally agree on and say, yeah. I mean, the only one thing anybody will agree on, there was a picture yesterday, and I saw it in West Falmouth Harbor, where all the greenalgae was growing there, and there was a boat trying to make a paddle boat in the middle of it, trying to make its way. I don't think there's anybody in the room, or anybody in any room, that would sit there and say, oh yeah, I'd love to swim there. That would be about the only agreement you'd have in the room.
Well, one of the other issues is so many people have never seen it differently, at least within their memory. Some of us remember when you could spend every evening wading around in one of Falmouth's estuaries chasing crabs and fish and other things in water that was more than knee-deep and you could see the bottom.
Yes, there was discussion about that yesterday also, that many of the houses, why West Falmouth was such a success, is that many of the houses been in there for generations.
Yep.
So there was a generational passing down of, gee, it used to be like this there, and a hope that it could get back to that. So there were a lot of things yesterday I thought were, and it was the first time I really thought about it, because, you know, the two folks who take care of the properties out there, they were there, and I've sat across them with coffee and listened to it. That's a community that really loves that harbor. And they have this long-standing understanding and historical knowledge of that harbor. And boy, that made this program quite a success. That and the fact that the folks out there were sort of wealthy enough to be able to say, oh yeah, I'll put one of those things in.
But there's still a certain level of denial. I almost had a fight years ago with one waterfront owner there when I pointed out to him his beautiful beach was bright green because of his septic system. And it just, no, I'm quite serious. He just said, no, there's no way, that couldn't be. But
Yeah, Ron?
I was just wondering, George, have you got any cost, like, I'm sure the installation costs and things like this, what is the kind of range of the systems that went in for the installation cost and then the operating costs? If we put this in contrast to a sewer system, basically, and we have a good analysis actually from the Oyster Pond studies. But in this case, the real on-the-ground experience, what's kind of the range of costs? I mean, if we think about how moving forward, especially in the more eastern parts of town along the south coast, where very high estimates have been made per household to sewer. Is that a verb, sewer? Anyway, to adding sewers. But do you have a range of costs and then the operating cost estimates and this kind
Well,
of thing?
folks have said from $5,000 to $15,000 above a standard Title V system. And I think I hesitate to do any kind of generalization like that because if you took a block of 100 houses, there'll be a certain amount of that block that will have infrastructure already in place. They'll have a septic tank, they might have a leach field, and you might be able to retrofit something in between them. Others might, you'd say, no, we're gonna have to take the whole thing out, so you're talking $30,000 for something like that. Or somebody else, it's the component and the installation of this thing that side streams. The technologies haven't all been worked out yet, so
Well,
I
that-
think I'd hesitate to drop numbers.
Right.
But I always say somewhere between $7,000 and $12,000 above, that's what I've always said at the county, something $7,000 to $12,000 above a standard system.
It's like what, 35,000?
I think there's a pretty good
Certainly
analysis
25.
in that final
Yes,
report.
there is.
In the coalition report
Right.
that's been published.
Yep.
Okay,
And
good.
the only thing not to take those exact numbers are that the West Falmouth Harbor project, as many of the demonstration projects, they're going through this now down in Long Island because we're working with them on some projects down there, is that the costs don't go up as time goes over. They actually go down because you have, I just looked at some of the costs in New York, and they said $45,000 to put in this thing. I said, what the heck costs $45,000? I started looking at it, and I talked to a contractor down there. Contractor had never put in a leach field other than a cesspool. Never done it. So therefore, he said, it's going to take me a week to put in that leach field. I'm thinking George Patel put that thing in probably in a half a day. And I say, yeah, I mean, that's why that costs so much. A panel is going to cost me $5,000. I don't know any panel out there, unless it gave you a massage at the same time, would cost that much money. It's $700.
Right. The reason I ask in a way is that around Bourne's Pond, when the Bourne's Pond Inlet Widening Project was done, and GHD did a cost analysis as opposed to sewering, how much would be the savings. Well, their estimate per household was about $47,500 for sewering, and therefore the inlet widening was justified against that. Now that's a big figure. I mean,
Right.
and compared to some of the things you're saying here, so it might be that that could drive this as well
Yeah.
in the community.
I think it's good going forward to, as the proper technologies are identified and the market develops for them, of course, that will drive the price down a little bit. And it will be specific to an area because, as you said, the sewer, $47,000, I imagine a lot of that's conveyance.
Yeah,
That's
or
that's
whatever.
not the capital of
Or
the
a new
plant.
plant
That's-
as well,
That's
maybe.
conveyance and upgrades to the plant. And I think that as you look at the technologies developed, the permitting gets a little bit trimmer. There are some creative ways to approach DEP as far as a watershed permit, for instance. If a town was to have a watershed permit and said the town takes responsibility for this watershed permit, well, technically, you can make the case that Title V goes out the door. This is a groundwater discharge permit for the town. Title V doesn't apply, so the town can possibly make better deals for some of the technologies that are piloting that might not have gotten through the gate yet because they just haven't had enough time, but they're good. There's a lot of things can happen. It's very difficult to come up with cost estimates at this point. So I only caution against using them at demonstration projects simply because those costs are always inflated. I mean, even a best contractor, and we know we have good contractors in town, as soon as they see uncertainty, it has to translate to cost. If they keep that machine an extra day, it's an extra, couple grand sitting there with a truck waiting with soil to fill a hole that they didn't know they had to fill.
Since we have you here, could you sort of bring us to speed on the layer cake? and-
Oh, okay. Well, as you may or may not know, we received a SNEP grant, New England EPA grant, to put in 12 systems, and the Coalition for Buzzards Bay has been helping us do quite a bit of that. The grant calls for putting in 12, 6 in seasonal, 6 in year-round homes. We've gotten 3 in the ground right now. Unfortunately, one has been in a house with very limited use, one's in seasonal home, and one's in a year-round home. In the year-round home, we're just starting the monitoring plan. In fact, next week, we'll start the monitoring plan. Initial results look very good, but we know what will happen with this particular simple approach is in the winter, the performance will go down. In the summer, it will be super. So we need to do our due diligence, do a little bit more research here and figure out what are going to be all the facets, aspects of this technology which will allow us to give a proper appraisal. And you go there during the summer and the numbers are down below 5. And you go there in the winter and the numbers at 50% removal or half. We are finding out one thing with all of our layer cakes, because I call them layer cakes, I'm sorry, bad metaphor.
No,
bad
that's what
metaphor.
everybody
That's what we
knows,
call 'em.
and
Yeah.
we just put it in quotes.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Do they
Nobody
have
eats-
another name?
We don't attribute the
Nobody eats
quotes.
birthday cake anymore, but, so we are very fortunate with that technology. It's one of the few technologies where you can tell what your influent numbers is.
What's your input number?
Influent number, right, because you get it right before it goes into the treatment, which is a leach field. What we're finding out is much what Mike said. For instance, the last time I just took one of the cake samples, the influent number was 98
Yes.
nitrogen, 98 milligrams per liter. So in our control portion of the particular leach field, the nitrate came out at 99, and at the other part of it, it came out at 12. So we know the wood is working. Because that was the other nice thing about the SNP grant. Half the system got the treatment, the other half has just a standard Title V. You say, well, why would you do that to somebody? Well, they are guinea pigs, and they volunteered for this, and we really need to know case by case and have a good control each way whether this thing works. Because if it works, they say, well, how do we know it wouldn't have worked anyhow? So the next one, by the way, on the 17th, the Buzzards
Yes.
Bay Coalition sent you
Yeah,
something.
we were going to pass it around.
We're going to install one in Acushnet, and that one is going to be heavily instrumented by the University of Rhode Island. They're going to do all the gas analysis, all the moisture, everything. We're taking all the nitrogen samples. But with the help of Jose Amador, he's a soil microbiologist, we hope to really tease out what the processes are. Because a big question for me is, if we denitrify, are we going all the way to nitrogen gas, or are we stopping at nitrous oxide? Which would be, of course, no laughing matter. Nobody gets that.
He's been waiting to use that line.
Yeah, I have been. Took me a while to figure out how to work that in, but it got there.
All right. Well, thank you. We're all looking for the Holy Grail, and I think you're getting closer. Ron?
You mentioned that it functions better in the summer than in the winter.
Yes.
Temperature. Is that sort of the nature of all these IA type things?
All treatment units suffer in the winter,
Right.
even your treatment plant suffers in the winter. Then there's a particular thing about the layer cake that we just have come to understand is most of the time it stops the nitrification in the winter. So you can't denitrify if you don't nitrify. In the soil system, it seems to be the other way around. It nitrifies all year round, but it carries so much oxygen into the denite layer, it stops the denitrification. There is, by the way, another technology that is being developed out on Martha's Vineyard, I think, and we've tested at the test center. It's very promising, and I've let the Falmouth folks know that in the next round, that might be an appropriate one to put in over here for a pilot, because it's a couple of retired gentlemen from Alcoa, who are wastewater treatment folks, who like to see that. Folks say, well, now turn my brain now toward applying it toward a community problem. So they have a grant, and we are in part with them, our department is, to put 10 of them on the island. That's specifically working with the wastewater treatment plant over there. And as an update, we also, the county applied for a grant for the town in part of Falmouth and Barnstable, because there's another technology that took some of the principles we're doing with the layer cake and commodified it and put it in a small footprint. And they got a grant from CEC, as did the people out on the island get their grant from CEC. And we're in collaboration with them to put that in and run it through its paces at the test center. So there's a lot going on, particularly, and a lot of people working with the lignocellulose, which, if anything, if the layer cake turns out to be a flop, it has at least encouraged the commercial folks to start thinking, gosh, we got to chase that thing. And that's what they're doing.
The retired Alcoa one, does it have some particular hoped-for advantage?
Yes, it's, the one is that it's a tank system that can be retrofitted onto an existing system, and it's a single tank.
Yes.
It uses wood,
But,
sawdust.
but all these systems still have the, like the septage or whatever it's, the solids has
Yes.
to be pumped, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
taken somewhere to be
Yes.
treated. So that's another,
But no more than, those would
Right,
have
type
no more
five.
than a standard septic tank. Some of your treatment units that recycle and aerate, they actually create more sludge, because aerobic conditions create more sludge. The septic tank is extremely efficient at reducing mass, it's just slow, and it's anaerobic, and it doesn't remove nitrogen, and it smells.
That's strike 4. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Crazy question.
Come on up.
Crazy question, coming up, on the right.
Have you ever heard of, or do you think there would ever be hope for injecting some kind of carbon,
Sure.
like vegetable oil, under existing septics? Just go
Yes.
down and just do that?
You could, and it's just like they do with the permeable reactive barriers. You could go down gradient of a plume, particularly in areas where the groundwater is shallow, so you're not pushing it too far down. It's really creating a carbon source beneath the nitrification layer. The problems with it are finding out exactly where the plume goes, which takes, some study. Plumes change depending on this year. I'm going to say a lot of your plumes are doing some shifting because of the high groundwater. They're not going that path they were going. They're going a little bit.
So you wouldn't just go under with such a tool?
Well, you can go under, but a plume is not static. It just doesn't sit there and say, hey, I'm going to process. It will, if you saturated that area under there with a carbon source, you could do it. So basically, what the layer cake says is, yeah, we'll put that carbon source underneath that leach field. And it won't move. So you have the oils or the solid oil or whatever you're going to use, any type of carbon source. If it doesn't stick right there, it's going to move. And then you've got to figure out, when is it going to run out? Can I direct all my plume through it? The whole idea of the layer cake is that water can't go anywhere but down and out a little. And we're going to blanket that area. We're going to put a big reactive barrier right to where that water has to go through.
I was just thinking of an interim,
Yeah.
something we could be doing cheaply for.
Well, I
Doug,
think you're already
we looked
looking at
into that fairly
PRVs.
seriously last summer,
PRVs.
and, no, the injection underneath.
Oh, the
Remember I
injection.
talked to you?
Yes, that's right.
And then we made it public domain by announcing it
Yeah.
at one of these meetings. And the biggest problem, as I saw it, with George's help, was the difficulty in monitoring it,
Right.
convincing DEP for each of these systems that they were working. Because with George's,
Long-term, just as a
Yeah.
temporary.
with George's layer cake, he's opened up the soil to put it in, so he can put a collection pan in first at very low cost.
Right.
The whole idea of injecting is that you don't have to open it up.
Yeah,
But then
right.
how
Just
do you
pump
get
it
that
down.
pan in there without defeating the purpose of the
I
simplicity?
wasn't suggesting for testing, just
Yeah.
something that we could be doing just while we're waiting and planning.
Great.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks, George.
Thanks for all the opportunities.
We have a whole series of updates here and reports from members and staff. Steve, Oyster Pond,
The working group met a few weeks ago and restarted the official process with Wright Pierce, the engineering contractors, to write up in greater details the costs and effectiveness of IAs and sewers, which are what we boiled it down to as the two possibilities. And that should be ready for presentation to the Water Quality Committee sometime in June, and after those comments to the public at a watershed meeting in early August.
Comments, questions? Thank you. Virginia, accessory apartment bylaw.
We've had a second meeting, continue to look at what kinds of improvements would need to be made to the accessory bylaw. Part of the meeting got sort of, I would call, diverted, because there is an article on the town warrant to extend the accessory bylaw to one more area of town. It's the general residence district. And a lawyer representing a client who's particularly interested in that was at the meeting, and so we got into a lot of specifics. The planning board did not include maps of where in town these general residence districts are. So you'd be voting on something you didn't really know where the impacts would be. And just before this meeting, I went up to the planning board to get those maps. And they're little bits and pieces here and there all over. So that's obviously going to be dealt with on town meeting floor. So all I'm saying is this particular meeting was not as productive, or at least my sense was we didn't move as much forward as we did on the previous meeting. And it's definitely a work in progress. There appears to be pretty good agreement that we will try to pull all of these pieces together so that it will be in the fall town meeting. And I think that's my report.
What's a general residence area?
The town has various zoning areas: agricultural, residential, commercial. Well, there's a category called general residence, which allows for apartments, and in a general residence you can already have 2 dwelling units on one parcel. So it's theoretically it's more intense housing in a few scattered areas. That's about the best I can explain it.
Yeah, allowing an accessory apartment in that zone would allow for 3 dwelling units
Now,
on a lot.
right, with no consideration about the size of the parcel.
I'm not sure, I never checked the accuracy, but Jim Fox once said that he thinks most of the general residence is around the area of downtown.
It turns out that's not correct.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
There is a little bit here, there, and everywhere. Wacoit, Woods Hole, T-Ticket.
But are they in like the village centers?
Not even necessarily that.
Really?
Just in T-Ticket, there's one way over here, and then there's a little slice over here. It doesn't make sense.
So I guess then really, if we would approve that, we're basically saying that they can go anywhere. Because what would be excluded, industrial?
I guess industrial. I'm now just speaking personally. I think until we figure out and develop a consensus on the accessory bylaw, why extend it to yet more parcels when the law itself has questions and flaws to it? And it certainly is very scattered, so it's very hard to judge the impact.
And I think the reason that we didn't include it wasn't really an oversight, because we said there's a lot of flexibility already in general residence.
And I would agree with that, yeah, because you can already have 2 units per, so I was told it was an oversight, but it looks to me
I
like
think we touched on that.
originally, yes.
No, we didn't really focus, but I think we did at least consider that.
It would make perfect sense. Why would you allow an extra unit in a zone that already allowed an extra unit?
It was just less effective, but in retrospect, I mean, if we can work it out, I guess I would like to see them everywhere, but we'll see.
True enough.
And since Virginia's already on the platform here, how about the Coonamessett study?
Oh, okay. The monitoring for the Coonamessett River, the vote was that we were to check on the procurement issues. I met with the procurement officer. We decided it was a gray area, not required, but a gray area. So in terms of best management, we decided to go for a request for quotes. And we have done that with the help of Steve and Matt, who are on this working group. We've issued it to 4 companies, and the deadline is April 11th.
Any comment, questions? The last time we were here, we were hearing that the Landscaping Association was going to consider sending a letter to all of its members about the fertilizer bylaw. And they did consider it, and they are going to allow such a thing. So I've got great copies of the letter that's going to go out. And you're welcome to see it. But it will let all the landscapers know what's expected of them, and particularly along the 100-foot area near the water bodies, the estuaries.
Any chance we could put something on the back of this letter?
This is the letter. This is the draft of the letter. Would you like to put it
Oh,
on
no,
the
I
back?
don't know, I'm just saying though, like, rather than using just one side of a page, if we've got another message to put in there, let's try and use it as another something, you know. I'm
Well,
not
it's
sure.
going out under the harbor master's signature.
Right, right.
So he
At
might
least
have-
on one side it would
Sure,
be.
he might have some other messages, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But this is just a landscape, not the whole town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
this
To a
is
few
just to
businesses.
the landscapers.
Yeah, but there might be some other, other aspect they could learn about or something, or whatever. But it's good. This is good. I'm just saying. I just hate to see one side of the page.
You know the feeling. All right, we've been invited by the Great Harbors Association to meet them in June, where they want to hear more about the possibility that Great Harbor might be involved in some sewering in the years ahead. So Ray Jack will be going on behalf of the town DPW, and any of us who want to go will be going on behalf of us. That's on June 23rd at the high school. We'll have notice of that long before June 23rd, but just put it on your calendars. Shellfish Working Group. Update, any update on them?
No?
Doesn't sound like it.
No? Or who is it?
No.
No, weren't you the one we appointed to?
Oh, on the working group? They haven't met.
Shellfish Advisory.
Advisory group, okay. So I did talk to Peter and.
Peter Johnson Stockton.
Yes. And they have put out an RFP for bids for the next bit of work to do on that. And I believe that they've come back, and I don't know what the closing date is on that, but I think it's already been passed, and they're in the process of selecting someone to do that work. So at some point, we'll be notified what that is, and then I assume that they'll begin that next scope of work.
Fair enough. There was reference made to the Buzzards Bay Coalition on the 17th, holding a meeting to talk about the layer cake. It's at the coalition's headquarters in Buzzards Bay. It starts at noon. There is a free lunch. And it will involve George, who you've heard from, Brian Grady, who designs and permits these things, some of the homeowners, and then a field trip to Acushnet to see a layer cake in action.
Bring goggles.
A glass-bottomed layer cake.
So there we go. They offered at this last seminar to have people come over and look at the West Falmouth demonstration project in action, but nobody wanted to come for some reason.
Well, if the meeting was in New Bedford.
Right,
yes.
it wasn't
It was
convenient.
pouring rain.
Yeah, right.
Oh, well,
A
that's.
lot of reasons why that didn't work. I got that one. The legislature has been busy. They passed this hotel
Yes.
motel tax that they are now going to impose on the Airbnb people of the world. It will involve a tax, and how much is to be determined, to be paid to the state, a local option tax to be paid to the town, if the town wants more revenue, and a 2.75% add-on just on Cape Cod for a water protection fund that would involve, once there was money in the fund, grants to the towns for water protection improvements. It's clearly on a track that's going to happen.
Eric, is it called out who's going to control that fund?
Yeah, well, the legislation that they've drafted, and both houses have pretty much passed the same thing. It involves one representative from each town, all 15 Cape towns and all 6 Vineyard towns and Nantucket. So it will be a large body of people.
Eric, go ahead.
Sure.
Has anyone done a back-of-the-envelope calculation, assuming that Falmouth doesn't get all the money from the state of Massachusetts, because I think somehow other people in Massachusetts would object to that, but if it was prorated, that each town got its tax, what the amount would be?
Good question. The premise here is each town will not get its own tax. It'll all go into this common fund.
But
If we were to get our own tax, it's hard to tell. You can calculate how much you would get from the 2.75 that would go on to the existing hotel tax. And it's a few $100,000 perhaps. You can't really calculate yet as to what it would bring in from the Airbnb, because that's new territory and nobody really knows. It's not a giant windfall. I mean, if it turned out to be $500,000 a year, it would be enormous.
Yeah, I think, didn't somebody estimate for the state part, maybe around 35 million? So
Right.
you might be looking at, what, 100,000 per town? If you divided it up
Right.
equally amongst all the towns, it'd be
Exactly.
100K.
Exactly.
Per
I
town.
think that's important to emphasize, because there are people out there implying that this will solve the Cape's infrastructure.
No.
And it's not. It's just a few grants to do some study or something.
Well,
Could pay somebody to write another 208 report or something.
Well, now that you mentioned it, one of the earmarks in this piece of legislation is that 10% of the money go to the Cape Cod Commission for that very purpose. So they will be guaranteed a certain amount of money, and no one else will.
When we had that MVP program at Seacrest Saturday before last, Dylan Fernandez came and spoke, and he said, I don't know if it was the final outcome, but he said at that time, it looked like the 2.75 was only going to go on the Airbnbs and houses and not be added to the hotels.
Okay, well, it's in the House version, it goes to the hotels and the motels.
Well, that was,
It may not in the Senate, but
Okay.
we'll find out as they.
right.
Well, they have to
But the
reconcile.
point is, even if you put on everything, it's still small compared to the town's budget.
Well, there's a huge difference, though, if it goes on the motels
Sure.
and only on the houses, because
Yeah.
the houses will be sporadic. The Airbnb is easy because they send a 1099, so and they've already been warning the people in the network that it's coming and be prepared to pay the tax and whatnot. They've been actually supportive of it.
They were for it, exactly.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really, at this point, they'd rather see some changes, but that's.
Yeah, but there's a lot of different networks. I don't know how they are going to work.
Right.
So another thing that came up at that MVP program was the fact that with the sea level rise and the water table pushing up, septics in these low-lying areas like Mara Vista are going to be getting flooded. And so I'm thinking that maybe on the next round of sewering, we should probably go closer to the coast and catch all of them instead of saying it's just going to flush to the bay, because, you know, we're not fully serving that area, and then we're going to have failed, you know, inundated septics in those outlying areas that we've previously thought it wasn't important to do.
There's a real problem here, because the coastal, CZM, Coastal Zone Management, looked at it from where are the areas of velocity zones for hurricanes, and for sea level rise, just properties that currently have houses that in the future are just not going to have houses. We're going to lose real estate.
Right.
And by putting, so they were opposed when we were doing the sewer service area for Mara Vista and Falmouth Heights. They were opposed to going closer to the coast for those reasons. You're putting in infrastructure that is for properties that are really going to have to be, and I'll use the word abandoned, they didn't.
Interesting, okay.
There are future beaches.
Right.
The structures are going to come down, and all coastal communities are going to face something that we never have faced before, and that is we are going to lose real estate. So I would caution us going any closer.
Interesting, okay.
For those particular concerns. What do you do in the middle time?
That's what I mean, in the
The
interim.
houses are there now.
Right.
They won't be there at some other point, but what happens? I mean, we know that a lot of people have septic systems that are in the water table already. And I know one homeowner in Mara Vista who, whenever there is a hurricane, the storm surge, he always has water, and it's a couple feet in his basement. I mean, that's just standard.
In their kitchen.
I don't think we want to encourage that kind of habitation. How the town copes with this real estate that really should be abandoned is a conversation we haven't had yet.
Plus, there are people talking about buying out coastal properties, which is another political can of worms. And you have the flood zones causing people to put huge investments into putting their house up on stilts.
Right.
To drive along Surf Drive.
Yeah.
And so then if we put the sewers in, you're encouraging people to put even more investment into something that you may have to buy out.
Yes.
I was just thinking that they're gonna start suing us for not protecting them, but who knows how it's gonna play out.
In Wellfleet, the houses are going over the dune all the time.
Yeah.
And nobody's paying them for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So-
Exactly.
Ours will be different because they'll just kind of sit there and soak.
Yeah.
Really. Well, we'll kick this one off to the Coastal Resiliency Committee.
And one other question, if you have anybody hear anything from Mr. Howes about the mill pond yet? Or do we know when the date is for the report?
End of June.
End of June, okay, thank you.
Any other report of members and staff?
No, I'd just like to go back a little bit to the Coonamessett monitoring project. Because it is a gray area and everything, is there it's like when the Conservation Commission considers a project, or even the selectmen, they will ask, like in this case, if we were doing it, what does conservation think, do we have any input from them on a particular project, and what is the procurement aspect, and is there a checklist that we might want to check these things so we don't end up, especially with the gray area thing, it's hard to say.
We don't need a checklist when we have you.
Well, that's not really, but this should just be,
I do have some general information about that, because I did have conversations with the Conservation Commission. The grant money that they have is for permitting and construction, but not monitoring. So they're very interested in monitoring. So although it wasn't, a Conservation Commission board discussion, the two people that I talked to on the board both thought that this was a wonderful opportunity, and so they had no objections of any sort.
Right.
You're just collecting samples.
Right.
So.
No, I'm not saying, that's a specific project, I'm saying in general.
Right.
Should we, have other good ideas that are brought up, how we go about it, who would draft the scope of work kind of thing that would then be getting quotations or whatever that would be required? How does that work? Do we need a consultant to do that? Do we do it? Because in this case, I guess someone has now drafted a scope of work for the quotations. So that would need to be part of a process, step by step. You get an idea, and then you have to formulate it into a kind of an administrative package that moves forward.
Well, the next time there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, think about it.
Yeah, at a minimum, I think the next time somebody comes to us with an idea, we should just put it out for bid rather than, just
it out
right
for quotes.
right from
Or
the
quotes,
get-go.
depending
Right
on
from
the
the
cost,
get-go.
estimated
Fair
cost.
Any other report of members and staff? The minutes, I understand we have a little controversy, or at least some
No,
discussion?
just corrections.
Okay.
I didn't see any problem.
Okay, there was a last-minute piece from Ron that I haven't even opened yet, because it
Okay.
came late enough. I thought
What?
it was in.
Oh, no, that last minute thing was the
Oh,
Hild and Earl's
okay, fine.
comment.
Not to do with the
Yeah,
minutes,
Oh,
good.
yeah.
oh, oh.
The reason it was last minute, I just didn't get,
Yeah.
I wanted to get word from them that, I could distribute it. Nothing to do with the minutes.
Okay, good.
So your email about the minutes, I believe, was yesterday that you sent it. You sent it to Eric and me, and I asked you to send it to
I did,
everybody.
yeah.
Right, so everybody's
And
received
Steve-
that.
and
So
Steve
hopefully,
replied.
everybody has that, and
Yeah.
we'll just work off that. That was what I was,
All I got was minutes from Sia.
oh,
Oh, right, that's right, sorry. Because
Right,
you
that's-
you weren't there, so
Okay,
you don't have to I saved you the word.
fair enough. I was not at I was not at this meeting.
It's okay.
That was,
You're
sorry,
going to
that
abstain.
omission was intentional.
All
I
right,
should have
fair
put a
enough.
note, I should have
Okay.
put it.
All right.
We have runs.
So we have Ron's thing, and I'm just going to quickly run through it. So the first comment was simply a question about, we list the people that are present, but normally we haven't listed the people that are absent.
Right. I don't know if that's-
And usually the minutes don't.
Okay.
So, anyway. And then there was one other correction, some of it's just stylistic, but under 1, it's Doctors Niels and Kennedy. Okay, she put the first name, Casey.
Right, cool.
So I'm correcting that. Then you correctly said competing proposals is what it said. It should be quotations, so that's,
Or both,
What-
whatever, yeah.
well, these were
Yeah,
quotations,
yeah,
so I would accept that correction. You asked about Barnstable being missing. This watershed, the Walkway watershed, doesn't include Barnstable. It's only Sandwich, Mashpee, and Falmouth. This intermunicipal agreement is specific.
Right, but
for-
there is some mention of Barnstable in the top, right?
That was our model example,
That was our
Ron.
model example.
Andrew Gottlieb's whole presentation was about how that process had worked out
Oh, I see.
with the 3 bays.
Oh, okay.
Which
okay, fine,
Yeah.
included
okay.
Barnstable.
All right, all right.
Papaneset Bay, that
Yeah,
was the
Yeah.
model.
But the reason Barnstable doesn't occur in this one that we're posing now is
Yeah.
because Barnstable's not a player.
Right, right, okay, fine, okay. I just,
Okay, and then moving to 4, reports of members and staff. This was brought up by Steve. It says 2 public meetings. What it should really say is a workshop in June and a public meeting in August.
Well, I mean, it may, as I said, it may be that's what Sia said, and the minutes are supposed to reflect what someone said, even if it's blatantly wrong.
No.
But if you want to go toward what's the correct thing, I mean, any water quality meeting is public.
Sure.
But that's not what's meant
No,
by
it's
a
not what
public
meant,
meeting. And I didn't even know there was going to be a workshop, it's just going to be, it was my understanding, but John and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, Wright Pierce writes something, he shows it to the working group, we make comments, he fixes it, then we show it to a meeting of the Water Quality Committee, take comments, including possibly from the public, but I don't call that a public meeting. He incorporates that, and then it gets presented at a watershed public meeting
Right,
in
right,
August.
yeah, yeah. So what do you want to
So
call it?
I would just say a Water Quality Committee meeting and a watershed meeting.
Okay.
Fine.
I keep notes, and so my notes say a workshop in June. Says it specifically, workshop. Not, so it's a special water quality meeting is what is intended or what is proposed.
So it's also, Sia and I were both sort of talking off the tops of our heads. Notice, this was reports of members and staff, it was an
Yes.
informal thing without any notes or any preparation on either our
That's fine,
part.
That's
nobody's
okay.
So-
concerned. Do you want to change these minutes anyway?
I don't care, nobody
If you
ever
don't-
reads them anyway, but,
If you don't care, then let's not.
okay.
Okay,
Let's keep going.
all right, so it'll be 2 public meetings, will stand as presented. And then the remainder were just Rs and thes and things like that. And that's it.
Okay.
Virginia, in the paragraph that's under Shellfish Advisory Committee, there's 3 typos.
Shellfish,
The line that starts with, "as this committee is discussed,"
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Water quality,
As this committee, the is comes out, as this committee discussed, water quality and nitrogen removal
Right.
are important considerations and are in the town's interest as a whole.
right, and the next one is not the department, it's department.
Yes, right, yeah,
All of that was in
Ron
the
picked that up too.
yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't see your, I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah, Ron-
what
Ron
happened.
got the
I sent
typos.
it.
Yeah.
You did, you were on the list.
Oh, I noticed too, some of the emails from you still go to my old address.
Oh,
You should have the Gmail one in there.
okay, yeah, I should,
Um,
I'm sorry.
And you dropped the out after determined
Yeah,
on the next line down? Okay, good. You and I are in agreement.
Can we get a motion
was
to?
edited.
I move that they be accepted with these
I'll
corrections.
second
As
that.
amended.
Okay, moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Abstain.
Schedule for the next, one abstention. Schedule for the next meeting. I will be out of the jurisdiction during school vacation week. I don't know if anybody else will. Mike?
Unfortunately, no.
No.
I wish.
No. So you're welcome to meet without me or put it off for a week.
I would prefer to put it off for a week.
So where does that take us?
26th?
The 26th.
Doesn't
3:30?
have- Doesn't have to be the 26th, but
3:30, yes.
okay, might be in a different room just because somebody uses this, the CPC sometimes uses this room on the alternate days.
Okay,
They-
we'll check the availability of the room.
Probably be April 26th
April 26th,
at the same time.
yeah. I will check
All right. Motion to adjourn that?
Yes, a motion to adjourn, please.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
I'll third and fourth it.
that.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Yeah, well, 2 recovery days have been much better.